And I think about a lot. My best friend had gotten her doctorate, and a lot of her research was around leaders of color, particularly women in New York City, and how this idea of a double tax, well, and for many of us, a triple tax, because most of us go into schools that are struggling, but we get held to the same accountability and the same standards as principals that do not.
Welcome to Our Burning Questions, a professional learning podcast where we answer your most compelling questions about teaching, serving, and supporting multilingual learners. I'm your host, Jasmine Coaxum, and through our talks, I look forward to bringing the methods, philosophies, and stories behind teaching multilingual learners to light. Let's get into the show. Miss Pugh, aka Principal Power Pugh, is a proud native New Yorker who has dedicated her life to education and believes wholeheartedly that all students should have access to a high-quality education that prepares them for college and beyond. A self-proclaimed equity warrior and a first-generation college graduate, she believes that by creating an environment where children are supported emotionally, challenged academically, and empowered socially, every child can succeed beyond their dreams. Her commitment to education is a true calling, and she is highly driven to ensure that every child, regardless of zip code, can and will have the tools to succeed. She is determined to change the world one student at a time. Miss Pugh is a transformational leader with 23 years of experience in all grades. Throughout her journey in the education field, she has held numerous positions, beginning with several years as a successful classroom teacher. For 7 years, Miss Pugh held the positions of assistant principal and principal in both charter and district schools, where she worked to turn around those that were struggling. She currently is the chief education officer and owner of the educational consulting firm Courageous Solutions, where she continues her work as an equity warrior and disruptor by supporting schools across the country to strengthen their practices and ensure that all students have access to high-quality educational experiences in affirming school environments where they thrive. And we are thrilled to have her on our show today to answer some of your burning questions. Okay, so welcome, Principal Samantha Power Pugh. This is how I know you.
Yes.
And before we get into everything that I want to discuss with you here today, I want to make the audience aware of how we actually met. Okay, so we met through OSG, Off School
Yes.
Grounds.
Shout out to
And
OSG.
yeah, and we're going to talk just a little bit about that and what that is, of
Right.
course, for the listeners who may not be familiar with it. But there were quite a few speakers at the New York State TESOL conference last year that were from the
Yes.
OSG family,
Yes.
right?
And I was so sad I missed that. I was so sad I missed that. But yeah,
Yeah.
we were representing. When you ask us to come out, we come out. Like, we talk our talk and walk our walk.
That's right. I think there were like 3 of you from,
I think
from
it was like it was like 3 people. I was like, yes.
Yes. And when you say bring it, I mean, they really brought it to me. That was really the highlight and the flavor of the conference was having those speakers from OSG.
Yes.
So, yeah. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about OSG? Wait, so I also ran into you or I saw you 2 more times, right?
Yes.
So I saw you on the Zoom. There's like a weekly
Yes. We
Zoom
have
call.
the meetup every Thursday, except for 5 weeks over the summer. We get together every Thursday and we talk shop.
Right. But then I saw you in person because you
Yes.
also do events. And I saw you in person at the golf. It's the golf classic, right?
Yes, the golf tournament. Absolutely. We just had our 2nd annual golf tournament where we raised money for scholarships. We were able to raise close to $30,000 in scholarships this time, and sending a few people to college, which is exciting, right? Because that's where all roads lead, be able to impact change for our people. So that's the exciting thing about OSG. So yeah, we have these different events, and we're about to have another one July 22nd. That is our annual cookout, and that's just really like a family reunion of sorts. But we have the leadership conference at Columbia. We have the Transformational Leadership Conference. We'll have our second annual one next year in March. We had our first one this year in March, which was a total success. So we had leaders from all over the country come in, and we talked to them about transformational leadership in a true OSG way. And if you know anything about OSG, you can imagine what that means. So we work hard and we play hard. So we had speakers from all over the country talking about transformational leadership, but we also saw the reunion of Freeway and Dame Dash. For the first time in 20 years, they performed on stage. They are faithful members of OSG, because hip hop is, for a lot of us principals who are out here doing the work, hip hop is the soundtrack of our lives, and often the soundtrack of our leadership. So
I love that. Soundtrack of our lives and soundtrack of our leadership. Okay.
So we get together, and so we do the thing, and I'm super excited. And yeah, so OSG is who I am, and that's where I got my name, Principal Power, because my name is Samantha Pugh. And, I was given the name Principal Power by Simone, the lioness, who bestows everyone with a name. And I think mine is probably one of the few names that really stuck. So there's people out there that actually just call me Principal Power.
Right.
And I'm excited about it.
Because why not?
Why not?
Principal Power. Why not do that?
Word. I was like, how come I never thought of it? And it's like how Beyonce has Sasha Fierce. That's her when she wants to go on stage and turn
alter ego, right?
Principal Power. I wouldn't say it's totally my alter ego, but it's definitely an extension of me. So I go into full Principal Power mode.
Okay, great. That was the next thing I was gonna have you tell the audience, because I announced you as Principal Power Pugh. Yes. So I'm glad that you told us about that. Now, I just want to take it back just a little bit. So OSG, off school grounds, like who, in terms of the members, and for our listeners, if they want to tap into the group, just tell us a little bit more about that dynamic in terms of who is there.
Yes, like I said, we meet every Thursday. It started during the pandemic.
Right.
Founded by Dr. Dennis McKeezy, who was my mentor and coach. And what he did was, during the pandemic, when we all had to work virtually, he realized how much it was impacting the leadership, and particularly the leadership of a lot of Black and Brown principals that he was in service to.
Yes.
So we got together with Lays Elliott, and if you guys know Uncle Lays, he is definitely tied to MOP. Shout out to MOP. And he's a hip hop pioneer behind the scenes, but very integral in the history of hip hop in the city. We got together with Dennis, and they decided to do this thing called Off School Grounds. And it was coming off school grounds to really talk about, having real talk about issues that was happening, so that we could be a support to each other. So that started with 22 principals. I think I'm like the 23rd or 24th. I'm not a part of the original, but I am a part of the original. Started with 22 principals, and now it's grown to, I think we probably average about 75 people on the meetup every week. And I'm sure we have over 150 principals, school leaders, superintendents. We actually have the former chancellor, Misha Porter, is a part of OSG. The mayor is a part of OSG, the chancellor. So we have people from all over. We have Freeway, Dame, Loon. So we have a mixture of educators, influencers, hip hop artists, entrepreneurs, edupreneurs, and people who just really are about making change and making impact in education. Yeah, so we get together weekly to talk about issues that are going on, so that we can help be each other, what I call be each other's crutches.
And this is Thursdays at 4 p.m., right?
Thursdays at 4 p.m. If you want to come in at 3:30, Uncle Lays is on the ones and twos from 3:30 to 4. rocking the house, and then we jump right into it. There's once a month, every fourth Thursday is Power Hour. I take over. I went on a little hiatus this year because I had so much stuff to do, but it's coming back. And OSG is just amazing. It's changed my life in so many ways, professionally and personally. I now have a network of family members that I could just go to, and they also have me that comes out and supports them.
Okay, so
The work that we do.
okay, great. So we'll definitely have this information in the show notes as well, because part of this as professional development, this podcast was definitely for that. And part of this is to encourage teachers who might be out there thinking about roles in leadership and just wanting to get a feel for what it's like and just, so I think that this might be a great way for them to dip their toes in the water for that.
Absolutely. That's a great dip. And you know what? We call it, and it's funny because we laugh, we call it Thursday sermon. So it's like church every week. So it's like you need that church to get through the rest of the week. So like you need that word, and the word comes in so many different ways. So if you're looking for a tribe, if you're looking for people that authentically show up as themselves, who are super smart, super dedicated, super connected, then OSG is definitely for you. So tune in on Thursdays. If you follow us at the official OSG on Instagram, or you could visit the OSG.org page, you can find out more information. And tomorrow we have a meetup, so come through.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to take it now back to you, right?
Yes.
And what inspired you to actually become an educator?
I love that question, right? Because it's like my favorite question to answer, because it is so meaningful to me. And it was a story that I told before, but now that I'm like come full circle in my career, it holds a lot of meaning. First, let me start off by saying, I have always been an educator. I've always loved children. I've always been the children whisperer. I always played school, loved learning, loved reading, doing all of that stuff. But I was a kid that was like, yeah, I'm smart to make money. Like, I'm going to be smart and cool to make money, not to make a difference. So yeah, maybe I'll donate money to schools and I'll volunteer once I get rich. That's what I'm going to do. So in my mind, that's what I had. I'm the first of 54 grandchildren to go to college. Blazing the trail for that was really inspired me. I had a tough time in high school. I grew up in the 90s, where the crack era, which we were like knee deep in the crack era, and it ravaged my neighborhood and my family. So I was trying to cope and figure out how I was going to get to this specialized high school that had very high expectations for me academically, while my home was falling apart, and so was my neighborhood, and so was my family. So trying to stay focused and get the education. And also there was no blueprint because no one went to school before me. So it was like I had to figure all of that out. So I met a school counselor who instantly saw something in me. And she'll tell you to this day, 35 years later, that she doesn't know what it was, but something was in me. And she just took me under her wing. She said, "What do you want to do?" I was like, "What do you mean what I want to do?" And really guided me and really poured into me and really tapped into that mental health side that no one had ever. She was the very first person to ask me, "How are you doing? And are you okay?" And I was shocked to get that question, but I cried because no one had ever asked me that. I was just a kid that was expected to keep going, keep doing in spite of. And then I met an English teacher, who we started reading the book, The Scarlet Letter, and it brought me back to a love of learning. Brought me out of a depression. So the two of them working in tandem to get me academically excited, and also dealing with mental health and depression during that time totally changed the trajectory of my life. So I went to school to become a lawyer. So I was like, great, I made it. Yeah, y'all teachers did some great stuff. It changed my life.
As you said, smart to make money, right?
And then I had a specific, like I was going to be, because I just learned about Jay-Z, and I was like, he's going to be major. I don't know about what y'all talking about. So I got to hurry up and get out of school and go to law school so I could be his lawyer. I anticipated that back in 1993, like how big he was going to be. So I went to school to become a lawyer. In my African American history class, we read the book Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And if anybody knows the book, it's like probably one of the most powerful books ever written. And we read that book, and I was just so moved by this idea of invisibility, or this dichotomy between invisibility and visibility. What makes people feel visible? So our final paper was to write about a time that we felt invisible and align it to the progression of the story of the main character in Invisible Man. So I wrote about the time when I was in high school and how I sat in the back of my math class for 5 months and my teacher never came to the back of the class, didn't even know who I was. And then I talked about my high school experience and how you can move from invisibility to visibility if people pour the right things into you. I got a phone call. So I turned in my paper. I turned it in on time, which was a feat for me back then. I had a dope professor named Mr. Martin. He called me at home at 8:00. And my house was called Cheers because every Friday at 5:00, it was party time. I was the party lady. So Cheers is going and my phone rings and I'm like, hello? He's like, this Professor Martin. I was like, oh my God. Okay, I'm in trouble. Something happened. He was like, you have a minute? And I was like, yeah. He was like, your story was so powerful. Is it true? Are the experiences in the story true? I said, absolutely. And he said, I've been teaching for many years. I've never given anyone an A+. But if this story is true and what you're saying it is, and your connection between those characters, I'm so moved about who you are and what you bring to the table. So I'm going to give you an A+ on this paper. And I was like, what? Right? He's like, yes, I'm going to give you an A+ on this paper, but, right? And I knew it was a but. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop because don't nobody give you, like, I'm from the hood. Don't nobody give you nothing for free, right? Like, so I was like, here it goes. So he said, tomorrow you have to go change your major. I said, what do you mean? He's like, you have to become a teacher. And I said, absolutely not. He's like, no, it is time for you to pay it forward. What those people did for your life, and you have to pay it forward. Promise me you will become a teacher. So I went the next day and changed my major to education.
Did you?
Yes, English education. I believed in everything that he said because he saw me, right? So it's, again, this dichotomy of this. No one had ever, I just told my story. I didn't do anything fancy. I was so moved by the writing and how much it told my story that I was just being authentically me. And he saw me, right? So if somebody could see me through all the muck and all the papers in the 15 years and say, there's something special about her. And I'm going to see her and I'm going to, not only did he see me, but he acknowledged me. And that meant so much to me. So I went, I believed it. I drank the Kool-Aid. I went and I changed my major and I haven't turned back since. So that's how I became an educator, because somebody believed in me and somebody saw me. And I know how important it is for little brown girls like me to be seen. So I wanted to curate the conditions where we could illuminate the voices of the voiceless. So, and now we're 25 years later.
Now, I'm going to quote something back to you from one of the blog posts that I saw that you wrote called Got Magic. Okay. And the story that you were just telling aligns with this quote that I found in this blog post of yours, and where you say, my one goal in life and career is to make sure that every child feels, sees, and owns that magic, their superpower. Yeah. I have seen lives transform and be saved when children discover this magic, capture it, and spread it. So someone saw your magic.
Yes.
Right. And this is what completely changed the trajectory of your life. Right.
Absolutely.
And at this point, yeah, the audience has already heard about the incredible leaps, bounds, and all the accolades and wonderful things that you have done, right? But I'm wondering what you consider to be your superpower, like your magic. And I know that you said that this person saw you, right? It was a professor, yes? This professor saw you, right? But Beyond that, when did you really discover your superpower for yourself? And how did that really, I guess I want to say, change you in ways to kind of bring you forward to the position that you're in now?
So I think I have always felt magical, but didn't know my magic, right? Like I knew there was something special about me. I just didn't know what it was. It's interesting that Dad, no one's ever, this is such a great question. No one's ever asked me this question, right? And I've been on about 17 podcasts. No one has ever asked me this question. I think I really didn't discover my purpose until the pandemic.
Mm.
I got into a major car accident and literally my car spun around on a highway, crashed into the divider and got hit by a truck.
Mm.
And I woke up, I didn't never lose consciousness. I remember looking up and seeing the truck drive. That's how his car was in mine. I could see his face and him mouthing, "Are you okay?"
Wow.
Like, oh, I'm dead. There's no way that I made it.
Right.
Right? Like, I'm dead. There's no way. And I walked away from that accident fully. No no scratches, no scars, no nothing. I fully walked out of the car after the
Incredible.
doors off. So
Mm.
after that experience, so many people, my staff, a lot of people heard about the accident, and people were upset because there had been rumors that I wasn't going to make it. It had been rumors because a teacher of mine actually was driving down the street, and this is how I know it was all divine, was driving down the street and saw the accident and knew that it figured that it was me and turned around on the highway, her and her husband, and ran across 4 lanes of highway to get to me because they recognized my car, right? Like, how
Right.
crazy is that? They recognized my car. How crazy was it that they were just driving down that street? And she thought I would, by the looks of my car and the looks of me, she thought I was dead because they knew that there was no way that I would be able to walk. And finally, her husband came and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Am I alive?" And he was like, "What do you mean, are you alive?" I was like, "Is this a dream?" And he was like, "But we got to get you out this car because it's going to blow up." Finally, the fire department. So I say all of that to say, and like my staff took care of me for 2 months. They bought me food and everything. Like my school took care of me. And it was so moving to me. And I remember one of my teachers saying, "What do you mean? You do this for us. So of course we'll do it for you." So I said, bingo, that's it. And I prayed and I said, "God, so just have me think of my purpose." So my purpose is to love on people, bring them together, love on them, teach them, and empower them to go out and do and return the same thing. I discovered that magic. And once I tapped into that magic, I was like, I can't be held in a school, right? Because my purpose is too big. I got to get out there and impact even more. I've done my due diligence, but now I got to go see people. I got to let people know that they've been seen, even if we ain't got to say it. And how they get to be seen is me just walking in the room and acknowledging that, yeah, your job is hard. This is the hardest thing you're ever going to do, but you ain't got to do it alone. And,
And
and that's how I became a school improvement coach.
that's how Courageous Solutions was born.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
how it was born. That's absolutely how it was born. And I think about a lot. I had my best friend had gotten her doctorate, and a lot of her research was around leaders of color, particularly women in New York City, and how this idea of a double tax, and for many of us, a triple tax, because most of us go into schools that are struggling, but we get held to the same accountability and the same standards as principals that do not. There's an expectation almost that Black women go in and just take, turn around, change the school culture. You don't need support. You just got that Black girl magic. So also what you'll find in that blog is that I tell you that it's actually it's not magic. It's something inside of us. But people that like to write it off as just magic. Nah, we got it inside of us. It's just up to us to either activate it or people who are equally yoked to activate it for us. So yeah, so that's how Courageous Solutions got started. I wanted to be the person that I needed as a principal. And I wanted to make sure that we stayed in the job in spite of having to work, right? But also acknowledging, yes, there's a different tax on us. That doesn't mean that's going to change, but we could change the system by uniting and coming together, loving on each other, sharing resources, and then going out into the world and doing the same thing.
Now, in the consultancy's name, you have rage in parentheses. Okay. So can you explain, before you go into like just a few of the specifics of what you do or what your team does, can you explain a bit about the choice to put the rage in parentheses?
Absolutely. So there is a very famous educational leadership book that everybody, it's a great book, and it's called Courageous Leadership. And I love the book. It gives you very practical things to do as a leader, because the idea is that to turn around schools and work in the conditions that many of us work in, you have to have a level of courage to get out there to do it. And I read that book and I thought it was great, but then I realized not for us. We got to do that. And I wanted to acknowledge that there is a lot of rage, and that we are persevering and running schools and changing lives and impacting lives out of rage and not out of love, not often out of times of, it's out of rage, because we get so bothered by how the system, whether it's the judicial system, whether it is the police force, whether it is like the systems that continuously marginalized Black and brown people exist. And we see the detriment of many people in the communities. So a lot of us are walking around here with rage. And then I started to notice, once I came a part of OSG, I really started to notice a lot of people that I was gravitating to, that were principals that I admired and loved, always told the story about why they became a principal. And it never was because my mom's a principal or my mom's, is a teacher. Like, I just decided it's always this trauma, right? Like, it's always this trauma. It's always because, like me, right? Like, my teacher didn't come and see me in the back of the classroom.
Right.
Or I was an athlete and I saw how they did kids that were student athletes. All the stories of the people that I know, that I love, that look like me, that service kids that look like me, had a story. And it never was. It was all, we became leaders out of trauma. And we stayed leaders out of trauma. So it has become a trauma response as opposed to effective leadership. So I wanted to tease that out to say, yes, a lot of us are traumatized either by a school system, a teacher, some of that, or some of all of it, right? But we could still turn that trauma into something beautiful. We could turn that trauma, as my sister says all the time, my sister, Dr. Action, says, turn that trauma into triumph. So using those things that made us angry, that brought us rage, to keep us in the seat and to have a deeper impact on our kids. So that's hence the name Courageous Leadership.
Okay. And so that really brings me, there's something else that you said. I think that it was in this same post where you said, like kryptonite for the character Superman, schools drained my energy, drowned my voice and my cries, smoldered my inner fire, and almost killed me. Yeah. Now, very powerful writing, by the way, just really moving. Pretty much a lot of the things that I read that you wrote, I was like getting more excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you.
I want to ask you now, so in your current role, what do you say to the administrators, the school officials, whomever it is that you're addressing, to empower them to do the exact opposite of this, right? To instead lift the voices of every student, to heed and understand their cries, and to actually breathe life into their fire.
Mm-hmm. So remember I told you what my teacher did? She asked me how I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's what the very first question I ask when I walk into a school or I encounter a principal or an AP, or in some cases a superintendent, as they rattle off everything, I sit there calmly and I look dead in their eye and I say, how you doing? And I would tell you that 60% of the time people cry. 60% of the time people cry. And I give them permission, right? Like, just asking them that question gives them permission to feel and acknowledge how they're feeling, because you can't do anything about it until you acknowledge it, right? But it's got to be carefully curated. So I just ask, how you doing? And Either people get really emotional or they try to ignore the question and rattle off. But I always come back to the same thing. How you doing? And then I ask them, how you doing this? And by the answers of those two questions, I could figure out what I need to do. So if a person cries and they're like, I don't know, I'm not doing this, and I say, okay, so then let's figure out all the stuff that you're doing. And let's pick 3 things that's going to be the highest leverage moves that's going to get you the deepest impact in the fastest time, because you're trying to do all the things and you can't do all the things. Then I tell them after and then many of them rattle off that the district isn't giving them this, or the schools aren't giving them this, or the system isn't giving them this. And then I say, okay, what you going to do? What you going to do? We can't wait for Superman. It's never coming. It's never coming. It's never coming. Superman is never coming. So are we waiting for the system to change, or we're figuring out how to work within the system so that we can dismantle it? That's always the questions that I ask. And that gets people activated. Just really having the biggest pieces are really giving people space to explain their rage. And then I always go into it. So if they say to me, the district cut my budget by $500,000, I'll be like, that sucks, right? That shouldn't happen. They filed for that. Okay, so what are we gonna do? It's just because how often do people just acknowledge how you feel, or authentically, or somebody that you know that's going through it really acknowledges how you feel? But I also hold their feet to the fire by saying, it ain't going to change. So what you going to do about it? So let's pick a couple of things and let's run those plays. And let's get really good at those things. And then we go to the next thing. And then we go to the next thing, right? But when you come into schools that are drowning, which a lot of us are, you feel like you have to do all the things. So that's how I coach. I am a big believer, head, hand, and heart. I graduated from Hampton University. Booker T. Washington is our most illustrious alumni, and he talks about that. So it's the idea of getting to the heart first, right? So like I ask them those heart questions, like, why do you do this? Like, why are you here? Why are you doing this? What's your mission and what's your vision? Why did you pick this? And then the hand is, okay, so let's get down and dirty. Let's walk some classrooms, let's walk the school, let's look at what you have, right? Even if it's a little of nothing or all of it is bad, let's look at what you have and then leverage that. And then the head is, I give them professional development in whatever the area is, or I direct them to somebody that has great professional development. So that's what courageous leadership is about, training and supporting the head, hand, and heart.
Now, it's really just such a simple thing, right? To ask how someone is doing, yet it just escapes so many people, right?
We ask it in a very matter of fact, right? Now, you can't really see me, but I was gonna say, no, if you could notice how I ask how you doing, right? It's very, I don't go, how you doing? Or, hey girl, how you doing? I might, but that's not, I sit down, I let them go, and then I lean back, I put my shoulders down, and I look them directly in the eye. How you doing? Because I want them to see that I see them. So how you doing is something we do every day. It's a lot of
That's
work.
right.
But it's all about the how you do that and the when. So I'm very strategic about and purposeful about when I ask the question and how.
That's interesting, because as an educator of people who are learning English as a new language, one of the first things that they learn is this idea about how are you, right? That's like a question that you ask. But then I noticed that quickly a lot of students, they realize that when they ask that question, it's not supposed to be taken authentically, like for someone to really answer it, right?
And like, you don't really want to know how somebody's doing, right? Like, it's just that thing we do.
Right, but they seem like really surprised by that though initially, right? They're always like,
extremely surprised. It's so funny that they are all, and these are people that have doctorates. These are people like, they are extremely surprised when I ask them that, but they're relieved. Surprised but relieved, because how often does somebody come and ask the school leader how they're doing? The school leader
really mean it and really want to hear the answer.
Right. The school leader asks everybody how they're doing, right? But no one, very few, one of my teachers used to do that all the time. How you doing? And what that meant for me, because I felt like I was alone. And I was in a job that no one cared about how I was feeling. So when somebody again, so it's this whole thing about visibility and seeing, that changes the game. So think about how we authentically ask our children how they're doing, right? Like, how you doing? And we're intentional and purposeful about that, and then having some solutions after we figure that out. It's powerful. It's like one of the most powerful things that I do. It's powerful for me because the other purpose is that one of the things I strongly believe is I sow out into this world so much because I get so much in return. So every time I give, I get back. It's always a reciprocal, and it's not transactional, it's a reciprocal process. It's it's this transformational process that when I see you better, I'm better, right? Like when I see you better, I'm better. One of my happiest moments of this year was watching one of my mentees go from assistant principal to principal because I understand the journey. And her saying, I don't know how I would have done this without you. And I'm like, I don't know how I would have done this without you. So it's just, I am so rich because I get to do the work that I do every day. And I've never been happier.
Now, the work that you do is obviously geared towards change, towards solutions, right? And I was listening to you on, what is this podcast? You were on this podcast called Dope People.
Oh, yeah, Dope People podcast.
Yes, and I was like, this is fantastic. Like, even the name of it, Dope People, who wouldn't want to be on that podcast?
So, I know, like in and of itself, you're like, yep, that's me. I need to be on.
Now, so on that podcast, you mentioned, of course, you've been an educator for over 20 years, right? So you said that in that time, you haven't seen much change, that you've seen many changes, but not much change. So I would like you to unpack that for our audience a bit and see, is there like a bright light at the end of that tunnel in terms of actually seeing change as opposed to changes?
So I think one is, I don't know that there's a bright light at the end of the tunnel, but I know that there's bright spots everywhere. So I used to say as a principal, we're going to go look for bright spots. And I used to be like, in the midst of the mess, places where great things are happening, and like we're going to live. And so I don't know that in my lifetime that I would see a light at the end of the tunnel. But I know that there are bright spots out there, right? There are schools, there are principals, there are kids of color that are doing the damn thing. But in order for us to go deeper and capture all of our kids, there has to be a total overhaul of the system. Because this system was never designed, forget about like for Black and brown kids, right? It never was designed for women. It wasn't designed for people who were not in the aristocracy, right? Like we think about how schools were developed for upper middle class white men and rich white men. So the system is designed around that. And it's a system in this country that really hasn't, one of the few systems in this country that has not evolved, right? So a school that your grandmother went to looks almost the same as a school today. So the system has not evolved because there is a danger. Because the one thing, if you want to change a civilization or a community, educate its people. So if we don't educate our people, then we can't shift the world. So why not keep schools bad? Because the danger in all of these people rising up and the danger of all these people getting educated, because like James Baldwin says, when I get more educated, I have to question the society in which I live deeper. And nobody wants us to question anything. So the silencing of culturally responsive literature, the silence of culturally responsive practices is intellectually makes sense, and your heart should make sense, and historically makes sense. But there are still people who are making decisions and getting away with it, making decisions to erase history. You erase people's history, then there's nothing left. For me, until we get to a point where we can dismantle, right? And when I say dismantle is like, nah, that doesn't work. And I see people do it, right? I see people say, the minimum I have to do for special ed in my school is this, but I'm not doing this. I'm using my resources to do double that, right? That's a bright spot. I see people like, yeah, my school don't give me the budget to feed families, but I know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that if you don't have your fundamental needs, then you can't learn. So guess what? I'm going to figure out how to raise money to get kids breakfast. I'm going to feed them. I'm going to have a pantry. I'm going to educate their families. I'm going to teach their families English. I see bright spots of that happening. But until the system shifts, those things will continue to be bright spots. And the thing is, we are the bright spots. You, me, OSG, we are the bright spots that are out there, because here I am shouting up in bamboo earrings and sneakers, but I'm telling you all those things, right? So we're giving our kids, and we're giving a new culture of teachers and educators and allies permission to be themselves so that they can dismantle, right? If we could peel away having to be somebody else and making our folks feel like they got to be somebody else, we could peel back that and they could show up as their authentic selves. We've gotten 50% there. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the people. I'm not hopeful for the system. So that's why I'll probably be employed for a long time. That's why you'll probably be employed for a long time. There'll be many of us out here that are still doing the work because the system hasn't shifted. So I'm praying for a major shift, right? But education is one of those things that everybody feels like they have an opinion about, because everybody's going to school, some sort of school in this country. Everyone has something to say. And most of the times it's not in reference to the future, it's in reference to the past. So when I went to school, this is what we did. So now that I'm 80 years old and it's 60 years later, I'm making decisions about something that worked for me 60 years ago. Don't make sense. Or I'm trying to eradicate people I'm trying to even change history. I don't even want y'all to know about Ruby Bridges, because it divides us. And I'm like, this country been divided. We grew up as a divided country, right? So until we start to level the playing fields economically, socially, in this country, education will continue to suffer, and the bright spots will continue to have to find each other so that we can support one another, because the work is too hard to do without that.
Now, given the amount of obstacles that we're up against in terms of making this major shift in the system, for the teachers who are listening to this podcast and they really would like to take part in facilitating this change, what would you say to these teachers who really want to make this leap towards leadership within their schools or within their districts, despite all of the obstacles that still exist and despite only having bright spots as opposed to a huge bright light?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you something my father used to say to me when I was younger. It's a little crass, but straight to the point. And what he would always say is that you can't be Black and scared. And I was like, what? I didn't understand the meaning of that, right? But his thing was, you can't be Black and scared. So that means that you got to live with a level of courage every single day to have the impact that you need to have. You have to be courageous. And if you're going into a leadership position because you want the title, you're going to struggle, because the title does not bring you satisfaction, the work does. And when the title brings you more satisfaction than the work is, then you become a part of the problem instead of the solution. The type of change and the type of leaders that we need to be is one that's not afraid. Like, I am not afraid now to lose my job. Like, I used to be like, I'm gonna put up with this, even though I know it ain't great for kids, because I don't want to lose my job. Like, I've lost 3 principalships. All 3 of them was because I stood up and said, nah, we're not doing that. And that's not the type of leader I'm going to be. So y'all want to find somebody, y'all can find somebody else, right? So you have to be not afraid. You also got to know your craft, right? Like, I'm not just a talking head because I feel deeply and passionately about the work. I also know instruction like the back of my hand. So know your craft, respect your craft, and then find you a crew. Find you a crew of people who think like you, who want the same things you want, and stay focused on those people, because it's going to be so many of the other people. So get better and get to know kids and families, right? Stop thinking about this ideal. You do not have the ideal job in the ideal place, and it's never going to be ideal. So you've got to find the joy in it every day. The most joyful teachers I see spend more time in their classrooms than anything else, because they love their kids and they love teaching. So if you're making the transition between teacher and leader, I would have urged you to come see me at Teach Jam, because that was going to be what my topic was, but we had bad weather, so we couldn't do it. But it was my session was called "So You Want to Be a Leader?" And the question that I start with is, what's your why? Because your why is going to keep you grounded when everything else is in chaos. Your why is going to be pushed. Your why is going to be challenged. And that's going to make the difference between you having a job, a career, and a passion for something that you love. So take time to figure out why it is, and don't let anybody change that.
All right, I'm going to just recap briefly. All right, for the teachers out there that are really considering a role in leadership, you can't be scared. Don't be scared. Know your craft, know your stuff, and find your crew, right? And then finally, of course, involve the community, right? Make sure that you're involving people in this, right? I think you also mentioned either in that podcast or something else that I read of yours about really wanting to involve parents and really keeping parents in mind when you're making decisions in general, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can't do the work without the parents. And the parents want the best for their kids. Every parent, even if the most dysfunctional family, and I've seen some, right? Like I've seen some over the years. But the one thing that they always say, is they love their kids. They want the best. They may not know what the best looks like. They may not, but they know they want that. And I was coaching a teacher last week, and she was like anticipating this parent who has been turning up and giving everybody a hard time. And I said to her, I was like, I'm gonna give you what has always worked for me. You sit there and you let them vent and go off. Let them go off. Because that might be the first and last time that somebody let that woman go off. Don't let them hit you or be disrespectful, but let them go off. And then you say to them, you know what I heard you say? There's something that both of us have in common. We love your kid and we want the best for your kid. So now that we got that, as long as we have that, then we can figure everything else out. And I told her, watch how that disarms a family. Because they will ultimately want to know that you care about their kid, and that you're going to be relentless at making sure their kid is safe and that their kid is learning. They need to know that. And then you could probably pretty much say anything after that, right? Because they come from schools where they didn't feel safe. They come from neighborhoods where they didn't value that school. There's a study about 80% of kids that struggle have parents that were disenfranchised from school. That's a huge number. So if we know that kids that are struggling usually come from parents, more than likely come from parents that struggled with school, then the data tells us that we got to do something with parents too. So they got to feel involved. They got to feel heard. They got to feel supported. And they got to feel like they also have skin in the game, but they also got to be rewarded as well, because it's hard work being a parent. It's hard work, right? And then you also have to build things around parents. So if you're only having your parent-teacher conferences in the morning or the evening, that doesn't work, because if you're in a neighborhood where there's working class families, if there's a large language barrier, guess what? I opened a high school in the South Bronx. And most of my parents were Latino. And so guess what I had to do? I had to go learn Spanish. And if I couldn't learn the whole language, I had to learn enough to open up the door of communication with someone. I remember I tell the story about when I opened my school in the Bronx. A parent of one of the kids came to me, spoke no English, none, but saw me and began to cry. And I said, "Oh, are you okay?" This is before I took the Spanish class. I was like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" I was like, "Get this parent some help." So I brought her in, crying. So she held my hand and I held her hand, and we walked to my office. And I got somebody to translate. And I said, how can I help you? What's the matter? And she said, my daughter has to go to the school. And I said, okay, yeah, I agree. Yeah, she got to go to school. But why? Because of you. And I said,
tears of joy. It was tears of joy, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. She said this is the first time she ever seen anybody of color leading a school. And me standing there said they had just come to this country and she was worried about her daughter being safe in school. Me standing there, her seeing my Black skin and my Black face, said to her that her kid is going to be safe. And that was all she wanted. So I don't take this stuff lightly. Like, I don't, like, we laugh, we joke, but I don't take it lightly. Like, I don't take who I am. I take who I am. I take some of the things I do lightly, but I don't take who I stand for and who I represent for people lightly, because that changed what she believed about her coming into this country and education for her kid. And that was just me showing up. Yeah. So I always urge people to continuously to think about how we show up for our families, because it will change the game. And they need the help too. Stop pushing them out. Have your school open and welcome. Do things intentional to support your families. Get together with community-based organizations and support their families. Because if we educate the kids, support the families, we 50% there of dismantling the system.
Principal power.
That's
you
me.
have definitely brought the power to this podcast today.
No, it was you. These questions were amazing. Like, it was you. I was just here. I'm just the talent. Let me tell you something. These are the best questions I've had in any podcast that I've ever been in. So salute and hat.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's wow. Okay.
So I do. I really do. This is great.
Look, I have 2 more of them. Okay. Just one. All right. The one is, where can people find more information about your work? If they want to follow you, if they want to see all these wonderful things that you have talked about coming up, how can they find out where you are and be where you are?
Absolutely. So every Thursday, I'm on the OSG meetup. Very rarely am I not there. I might be quiet, which is not often because I run my mouth, but I'm always there. So you can always come on, find your tribe, because I found mine. I found my crew. Come on and see if this crew is for you. And you'll see my little box that says Principal Power and this very fly picture that somebody took of me. And drop your information there. I'm there every Thursday. I am going to be at the Black Educators Rock Conference from July 13th to July 17th. And I'm doing 2 sessions. One session is So You Want to Be a Leader, and the other one is Authentic Feedback, Lessons from the Soul. So how do we use sneaker culture? Because I am a professional sneakerhead. How do we think about sneaker culture and authenticity to have people give each other effective feedback? So that's going to be fun.
What's the name of the conference? What is it?
Black Educators Rock.
Okay, yeah.
Black Educators Rock. So I'll be speaking there. And then I'm also sponsoring their sneaker ball, which we're raising money for kids. I am also, you can find me on Principal_Power Pugh on Instagram, and you could follow me. I'm a blast. I've been corny this week, so don't use this week as a gauge, but a lot of stuff. And you could go on www.samanthapugh.org for now, because the website is about to be revamped. But that's where you could find me, any of those places, or you can email me at courageoussolutionsed@gmail.com. Drop me a line. I always tell people 30 minutes to talk with me, 40 minutes to talk with me is free. So come through and let's talk. I love to talk. I love to support. And if I can't service you, I'd love to connect you with somebody who can, because I am a connector.
Now, the final question is, what burning question should today's educators consider in order to improve their service to the K-12 community?
What type of questions should an educator ask or be thinking about as they move through K-12 education? Yeah, that's the question.
Think
a little more about that.
I'm like, wait a minute.
A little bit more, because it was a good one, but I want to make sure I got
it. No, what burning question should educators think about in order to improve their service to the K through 12 community? What should be a burning question on their minds as they go on this path to better service their students?
Who am I and why am I doing this?
Mm.
Who am I and why am I doing this? Those are questions that you should ask, right? Because I did coffee with the principal every week during the pandemic, because who I am is a person whose parent that was not welcomed in school. It's important to me to make sure that parents feel like they have a voice. So I create structures so that they do that, right? So that's who I am. I am a first generation college graduate. There are certain things that I put in place to make sure, and part of the reason why I am is because someone cared about me emotionally and socially and academically at the same time. I created structures in my school building where kids get those feelings, right? So everything ties back to who you are and your why. So if you don't know what those things are, you're going to struggle. So spend time being reflective. And then the other thing is, what am I willing to give up to make sure that every single kid gets an opportunity? What am I willing to give up? What am I willing to get? And what am I willing to give up? Because you're going to have to give up something. So what are you willing to do? What are you willing to do? Because people say, I know my kids, I love my kids, I love education, I'm relentless. So what you willing to do? Because I'm willing to die. I am willing to, if somebody comes in here with a semi-automatic weapon in this school, I'm ready to die for the children here. If somebody says to me that schools, we're about to cut $1 billion worth of funding I'm willing to die for that. So that's how I operate. I'm very clear about who I am and my why. I know what I'm willing to die for. I know what I'm not willing to. So that's how I walk this earth and run this world. And that's how I'm successful, because I've been unapologetically, authentically, and connected to my why. And
All right. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to end this episode by quoting you once again, because it was just so beautiful. You said, take time to see the magic. It's really easy to see it if you let yourself see it. Yeah. So thank you so much for being on this podcast today. And we look forward to all your exciting events coming up and to following you.
Yes, please do. Please do. And we should get back together again. We got some work we could do.
All right.
Can't help but be the connector. I'm the plug. I'm always like, we got some stuff we could do. Also follow Smart Chicks with Kicks, also on Instagram. That's my other company. A group of principals and I started an organization that we're going to go around to schools and support kids and teachers and principals on how to show up authentically themselves. So,
okay, nice. Yeah. All right, Principal Power, everybody.
That's me.
Thank you for tuning in to Our Burning Questions, produced by Mid-State Auburn at OCM BOCES. If you would like to learn more about today's guest or any of the resources we discussed, please visit Mid-State Auburn's webpage at ocmboces.org. That's ocmboces.org. Join us next time, where we hope to answer more of your burning questions.